Good afternoon, everyone, and hello. I'm Jamie Strauss. I'm the founder and CEO of Digbee, and I'm really excited to be here today to do the second part. We had a great turnout in the first part of our how to turn a sustainability disclosure into a story that resonates with investors. And really, I wanted to dig deeper and really kind of tidy up some of the kind of open questions that came from that. If you go back to that first part, what did we actually discuss? Well, we really talked about how do we enhance stakeholder communication, shareholders as well as other stakeholders. How can we better prepare our project development and various due diligence processes? How can we build brand value through the level of sustainability? And of course, at the same time, always in the need, particularly in the modern world, of protecting our social license to operate. And if you were on that call with us, then you'd go back to this very simple chart, which a lot of companies use in terms of their valuation, and to say, how do we get a re-rate? How do we improve our valuation? And ultimately, that comes down to execution. And execution really now covers all parts of the sustainability slide. And I really wanted to talk more practically with three primary pillars, but really that is just 10% of the whole sustainability. But there are three important ones, and they give a good example of some of the underlying discussion points that really are being considered and how we can use sustainability to the advantage of valuation through better execution, through lower risk, etc. So what are some of the factors leading us to ultimately get a better value for a company? I mean, a demonstrable social license is, how do we protect the social license? How do we avoid some of the challenges that we've seen over the course of the last few months? And how can we therefore portray these points to different stakeholders to demonstrate a lower risk to that social license? Obviously, if we had an offtake partner, a credible offtake partner, then that de-risks in the eyes of the shareholders where we are. It also obviously de-risks that operational roadmap through to production. And with that offtake partner, we can ultimately end up with a preferred status. And preferred status these days really comes down to ensuring quality of product, but also ensuring that that quality of product also meets sustainability requirements necessary for that partner as they take that offtake into the supply chain. Other partners and backers within industry, whether that be partners at the development stage or ultimately going further forward, it could be a joint venture partner, all of that requiring sustainability due diligence in the process. Appropriate permits, I'm going to come to this later, but obviously having the permits in place has been something this industry has known about for a long time. But can we advance that? Can we ensure that having those permits in a quicker, more timely fashion? And if we can do that, I think that clearly demonstrates, or at least typically would demonstrate, a management team on top of it, on top of these underlying issues. Having a mature capital structure, having certain maybe funds or institutions as part of that capital structure would clearly indicate an advance for that company, and certainly as an attraction to other companies who perhaps might rely on them for due diligence in a more meaningful way. Having a clearly communicated company strategy, that brings all of this together. A communicated strategy in a clear way which looks out further than just the next 6 months, where a company and a management team are on top of their issues, they know the roadmap, can clearly add value when you're in a meeting with institutions or other forms of partnership. So as I kind of really said, all of this proactively indicates, if you bring all of this together, is more of a magnet and really puts a company into that top tier to move forward and to move forward with regards to trying to improve that valuation. But one of the really big challenges, which I think is a talking point at the moment, is this the average time from discovery to production of 17.9 years. The goal for the industry has, particularly in the critical mineral way, is in the critical minerals, is to reduce this to, I think, a more acceptable 12 years. It used to be 12 years. Is that possible? Many would say it's not. However, I think it's fair to say now that this is a discussion point which is now widely being discussed. Many would say it's not possible to reduce. I would argue that the shortening of the timeline has never been something that we've talked about before. It's now a full discussion in the United States, in Canada, in many parts of Europe. Norway, for instance, has actually, I think, put now a policy in place where responsibly proven development projects will see a lower or a shorter timeline in terms of its permitting. I think they've yet to demonstrate that, but it is a policy that is now in place. But perhaps more practical is, I was talking to an African producer the other day, and that head of sustainability, when asked the question, whether or not sustainability has really had an impact on them, he gave a number of different points across the spectrum. But one of the key points was, if one executes well as a producer and you've got buy-in from the local community, then when you go for additional permits, why should that permitting time be extended when the community actually wants that operation to come into production? And I think that was a really good example of bringing everything back to really saying that, what is that social license to operate? Are we able to continue to support that? And how will that then impact us, not just from a mitigation of risk with whether it's roadblocks or other forms of disturbance, but also advancing in a positive way future permitting, either at that mine or perhaps nearby. So what are these primary pillars of execution which I've picked on today? The three of them are carbon, water, and procurement. And in the case of carbon, I think this is a really interesting angle at the moment, because everybody's fully aware of the carbon issues going on in the world. One might be a supporter or not for whatever reason, but it's the reality, it's happening. But there is a clear drive by the supply chain to get low carbon metals for the future. The majority of mining companies at the moment or the majority of junior mining companies, as they come to go towards financing and going through their development and putting their pre-feasibilities together, do not consider carbon as a cost within their spreadsheets. And I asked myself, does that really help that company? Sure, putting in extra costs is not going to be great for an NPV, but overall, does that actually fully support the company's reputation when it comes down to going to private equity or other parts of the finance world, which has incorporated carbon as a means of future costs? And I think, from my experience in talking to certainly the private equity world and some of the more sophisticated institutions, is that companies and management teams who are being progressive and being transparent with the cost curves and with their costs when they're presenting the feasibility studies, have a much present themselves in a way that is much more appropriate, present themselves in a way that engagement is much easier when you're effectively setting out the full scene. And if you look at Jaguar Nickel here in this chart, they've just come out having restructured some of their forward-looking strategies to really go forward as a low-cost or low-carbon producer of nickel going forward. Now, this is repeated with Canada Nickel is another one with their project. And so these curves, these carbon curves, are in effect always dynamic. So it's not only a matter of identifying where you might sit on it as that curve is today, but it's always also having that input, talking to groups such as Crew or Scan who can help you on this. as to where that curve is moving over the course of the next few years as you develop that mine into the future. So the transparency of having carbon as a cost within your feasibility study helps to differentiate you as a management team in terms of talking with these financial groups. It is a central part of the valuation matrix. They will include it when they come to do their due diligence. And therefore, being on top of that and leading that narrative really is helping in that engagement and ultimately getting a better result from it. But then, having looked at that consideration, then who else does this effectively impact? Well, certainly from a board point of view, the board has an obligation to include sustainability at the heart of decision making. So if one excludes the carbon element of this, and frankly, for any other part of the sustainability complex, then really they haven't addressed their obligation. But further than that, I think it's the board and management team to better understand who's going to buy our product, where are we going to sit within this carbon curve, so that we can ensure that we get supplier best status, and therefore to have that transparency of communication when it comes to talking to potential shareholders going forward. As I said, a couple of examples here are Centaurus Metals with a restructured strategy, which came out last year, which I think was interesting, and Canada Nickel. Now, I've picked a couple of nickel companies here because particularly with Canada Nickel, they actually have a net zero solution here because of the nature of their geology. But it goes to any of the metals or frankly, the commodities that we're digging up. Now, with regards to water, water affects every single mine in the world. And it was interesting doing the research for this, that the USGS, the US Geological Survey, reported that 16% of critical mineral mines are in areas facing high or extremely high baseline water stress. Beyond that, a further 8% are in areas which overlap highly prospective critical mineral locations, such as Australia, Mongolia, USA, Mexico, Chile, and others. But we shouldn't just focus on the high-risk water stress. We should also look at the other end of the spectrum as to where flood risk is happening. 1 in 100-year events are happening more often than, I would argue, 1 in 100 years. And that is having significant impact across the water considerations of sustainability. Now, water considerations are not just runoff, but it also affects the tailings dams. It affects a number of other different areas, whether it's to do with domestic or camp use, or whether or not it's to do with the actual cooling and operations of a mine. And it's not just the quantity of water, whether it's stress or flood, but it's also the water quality and how we're effectively addressing that. And consider what's going on upstream as well as downstream, where the risks can affect the project and potentially be a risk to future operations, or possibly also affecting local areas and people, perhaps farmland or else or otherwise on the project going forward. And this is very much part of the planning process, baseline process within the sustainability situation. It's a significant topic. It affects multiple different areas of the stakeholder landscape. If you look at the operational side, a number of the areas I've focused on, and we can minimize or mitigate risk in a number of areas, whether it's through flooding or perhaps less use of water within the operations. Communities are impacted from a point of view of water quality, but also water quantity and access to that water. We can use this as a massive advantage in terms of improving the local community access to water and clean water for that matter. Now, that may just be not just domestic, but it may also be industrial or farming or whatever else it happens to be. Clearly, water stress has an impact on environmental and ecology. And as we move further and further towards nature positive, then there's an interaction between water and the nature and biodiversity side of things. A lot of this is interconnected, and water must also impact the consideration around pollution with regards to the underlying project and the impact on that, how that has locally within the wider area of interest. What's positive and what's exciting is the modern approaches to water use are increasingly available. We've clearly got to have better water management. Water is used not only in all mines, but considerable amounts of water are used. We've got to consider the discharge. And also there are some of the new areas increasingly require additional protection as well. So for instance, including seawater and some on land in some mining operations, then brings additional complications. So great news that we're not using fresh water and perhaps improving the local access to that fresh water. But at the same time, we wouldn't want to start discharging seawater into the local ecology, as that would have a negative impact. So if you're coming back to where we stand with regards to how investors are looking at this, investors are really looking for protections, avoidance of reputational risk, but looking for forward-looking impacts and how they can feel comfortable and reduce that potential risk, both on social license, climate change issues, local communities, ecology, etc. And putting out a clear strategy with regards to sustainability can overcome exactly that and turn this into a positive. I've touched on many of these areas. It obviously touches on the communities we've also spoken to, but local regulators are increasingly focused, not just increasingly focused on this, but I've seen Antofagasta recently being fined quite considerably for over access or over use of water, their relative to the water regulations that they had done in Chile. The board obviously has an obligation here, and how can we mitigate the use of water? How can we include new solutions like closed loop water situations? And operations need to be right from the design and development stage. They need to be guided, informed by engineers, led by companies as to how we can have improved water solutions fed into the new mines of the future. Some of the leading examples recently, which I've seen, I mean, Marimaca has come up recently with replacing fresh water down on the coast in Chile with recycled seawater from a nearby power plant. So not even picking it straight up from the sea, but actually recycling it. I've commented already on the Antofagasta extraction rules. And Cornish Metals, I thought, did a really neat deal with the local county council and a joint venture to install a new water treatment plant, which benefited the company, the community, and the environment as they were addressing some of the dewatering of the mine, the old mine down there. Now, one of my favorite topics is procurement, and the procurement processes can really have a significant positive impact on social license. And we really should ask ourselves, what sort of approach have we got to this? Have we got to meet certain government quotas? How do we adhere to the development stage and then ultimately onto the construction phase? This is a real opportunity for a win-win. I think there has been a lack of, shall we say, measurement of this in the past, and measurement allows us to then credibly communicate sustainability or specific areas of sustainability really positively. Through procurement, we can have a significant positive impact on the local economy and community relationship. That, in essence, then brings together the social license to operate. As we move towards construction, there are clearly increasing ability to have a significant impact on the local economy. Has that been properly managed or strategized before and then move into that? And to what extent does that have in terms of environmental ramifications? What I mean by that is, as you start to bring in significant amount of new heavy equipment and other equipment, clearly there is a impact both environmentally on the ground, but also in terms of the air, in terms of carbon use, etc. If we're going to start importing things from wide areas, clearly some things can't always be sourced locally. I think it's interesting with regards to Argentina that have just instigating that 70% of all supplies, including labour, must be bought in from the local region, which can have a significant impact. Others that perhaps would be impacted through procurement are indigenous people, infrastructure, as we kind of widen out new services to the indigenous population, securing infrastructure development in the local area, and therefore having parallel businesses going alongside, enhancing the local training of people in the local region. I've mentioned Argentina with it bringing in this new provincial intention, but also I had an interesting conversation with Fortuna Silva the other day, who highlighted that they're going beyond zero harm, which has been something I think a lot of mining companies have been focusing on now for some years, and how this has a positive impact in terms of local community, and some of the ideas that they have, how going beyond zero harm can then actually begin to have an impact on local procurement as well. So in summary, we're looking for a re-rate. We're looking to try and enhance the valuation of the company that we're talking about through excellent execution on key factors. Having a social license that we can not only be proud of, but is ongoing, is dynamic, and has full engagement with that local community, which includes transparency and accountability, ensuring that we can therefore attract credible and offtake partners for the medium and longer term, which can support that project. Having partners and backers and a mature capital structure that demonstrates that we've got on top of our strategy and our sustainability in order to promote that in a way that mitigates risk. Ensuring that our permits can be perhaps advanced. Now I know that's an aggressive statement at the moment, bringing things down from 18 years, but I see no reason why, under certain circumstances, we can't have a belief that we can reduce permitting times. If you listen to some of the comments coming out of Congress in North America, clearly that's something that they want to do. Canada has highlighted that, and a number of different parallel processes can take place as long as we get our social license fully supported. I believe communities ultimately can be given the confidence and accountability that can encourage this. And lastly, having a communicated company strategy that brings all of this together, can bring in governance, which is the glue to bring all of this together, that can give people confidence to raise or reduce risk, and ultimately raise valuations and attract new capital into the sector. So I've only covered 10% of these, although 3 I think very key and important areas. There are over 30 factors which relate to sustainability. And if we can begin to bring all of this together, as I say, in a clearly defined and easy to read and credible way, then I think we've got an opportunity of really adding a huge amount of value to this sector and attracting the capital that is required to deliver new projects of the future. Now, one I just wanted to highlight, we've got another webinar coming up in June, and we're going to start to bring in some external people and have debates and discussions and have interviews, which I think will be lively and exciting. But before I announce that online in the course of the next few days, I just want to highlight an offer that we're going to be bringing up. We will be offering a number of spaces on a 2-day course on sustainability in mining, which will be hosted live by Digbee and Satala. And if you have got an interest in that, in terms of submitting assessments and bringing yourself on to try and do a 2-day course, please do get in touch with Taya at the email address there and register your interest. So for that, I'm going to take some questions. If you just give me a second to get into this. There was a poll, which I hope some of you have been able to do, which is from a 1 to 10 basis, with 10 being of high impact. To what extent can credible sustainability positively impact a company's valuation? It would be great if you could just press your buttons on that. If there are any questions coming out, then that will be good. I see one at the moment here saying, how does sustainability affect valuation if it's never been done before? Well, hopefully I've kind of covered this, but really reduced risk both on the social and operational side. Better preparation. I think if we can go into due diligence processes better prepared, having mitigated any areas, then obviously that clearly puts you in an advantage to lead the narrative and enhance confidence. Putting the front foot forward, I had a conversation this morning with one company with regards to sustainability and the transparency of it, where to some extent they were nervous on having the transparency out. And I think really, if we've got to look back for the last 20 years, can we say our lack of cohesion and transparency with sustainability, has it worked? Well, there's been a flight of capital away from the sector. And in addition to that, valuations have collapsed. We're at a 40% discount to where we were in the mid 1990s. So I think from my perspective, it's not worked. There's ever increasing demands by different stakeholders for this transparency and accountability. I think we should go front foot forward. I think the sector does an enormous amount of good things. And if we can be more transparent, more concise with some of our actions, then I think that can raise confidence. Another question just coming up here is that we already do this. We've been doing it for 25 years. Why should we care? Well, as I say, I think the transparency and the requirements by many different stakeholders these days are increasingly demonstrating that we've got to take this in a new angle in order to address that. It's a sector that's deeply untrusted, but there's an awful lot here which can increase that trust. And if we're not clear with our transparency, then it's clear to kind of address that. I think on that basis, I think the next webinar is going to be in the back end of June. We will publish that shortly. If there are no further questions, hopefully that has been a help. Please do reach out. And thank you very much indeed for attending today.